Pulling the Airborne Plague out of the box, it's clear to see that this direct-to-consumer bike didn't see much human attention since leaving the factory overseas. Where other direct-to-consumer brands put some initial work into the bike to make the build easier, that's not really as evident here, presumably to keep costs down. Also not present are cardboard kickstands and nifty slogan-filled packaging. This is pretty bare bones. Past the packaging, however, you'll notice that you're getting a hell of a bike for not a lot of scratch. There are SRAM NX Eagle parts, RockShox suspension, wide wheels, big bars, and a dropper post, all for under $3,000. You were just going to toss all that packaging in the recycling after the first hour anyways, right? A lot of budget-oriented bikes do their best to lure you in with flashy bits, like a nice fork or matching anodized parts, and then they totally flail on the details. But that's not really the case with this sensibly spec'd Airborne. Sure, your eyes get snagged by the Lyrik Select and the Super Deluxe shock, but closer inspection reveals a nice dropper post with decent travel, wide, modern rims, and a short stem and some wide bars, with a nice, comfy saddle, which is great because you're going to have your ass planted in it for a long time as you climb with this bike. There are budget SRAM Level T brakes that felt solid out of the box. Tubeless valve stems are included if you want to nuke the tubes after you nuke those Kenda tires, more on that later. And the only thing missing from making the bike rideable is a set of pedals of your choosing. Add those and you're off to the trails. The bike's geometry is what we'll call classic for this type of bike. It's not a new, extra long, extra slack machine, but the 65-degree head angle feels slack enough to safely get after it, and the seat tube angle puts you at a comfy spot for methodical paced climbs. Seat tube length for our medium is on the long end at 430 millimeters, but the seat tube is not interrupted by a pivot or a bend, which means that dropper post insertion is sufficient. Keep in mind that a lot of folks wading into the pool of Enduro would not be best served by the same geometry as what's on EWS podiums. First thing you'll notice about the Plague when getting it onto the trails is that it's not going uphill in any kind of hurry. The overall weight of the bike is not unreasonable for a 160 to 170 millimeter travel bike, but it's certainly not winning any hill climb events. This dad bod bike came in at just a hair under 35 pounds with pedals. The pedal platform switch on the shock is easily reached from the saddle, and it will do wonders to quiet down the suspension bob as you sit back and spin the top few cogs of the Eagle cassette on your way to the top of the hill. Once you've eventually made it to the top of the hill, you'll be rewarded with a bike that punches well above its economic class on the descents. The Lyrik Select kept things stiff and tracking right. The budget damper of today was the whiz-bang wonder damper of a couple of years ago. And while this fork may not have the external adjustability of some higher-end offerings, that is frankly better for most consumers who would do well to just set the spring and rebound and go ride. Same goes for the rear shock, which came out of the box with the rebound in the wildly wrong place, just a half click from wide open. Once the spring was set and rebound was reined in, the shock did 95% of what we wanted it to, just by flipping the pedal switch to the appropriate spot. The Level T brakes were standout performers for the test session. A quick bed-in period led to solid, stiff-feeling brakes that did an admirable job of slowing this chunky boy down on this husky bike. The X-Fusion dropper post has a funky trigger that does offer some adjustability on where it's placed, but getting it there took a bit of tinkering. Also of note, the post did not come hooked up in the frame, which isn't necessarily a difficult process, but one that the average consumer of a budget-level bike probably hasn't done before. Including some basic instructions in the box would have saved time hunting them down online. The bike feels balanced and behaved well on fast, smooth trail, and was ready to eat choppy hits when things tightened up and got rougher. The sluggish acceleration that we experienced on the bike was felt most at the exit of corners that weren't railed just right. Slow hub engagement didn't help the bike in feeling any snappier. But once up to speed, the bike did an admirable job of balancing playful with plowful. The Plague felt so immediately comfortable that our descent times on local trails were within a few seconds of those average times set on much more expensive and much more familiar personal bikes. You could drop a bunch of money into upgrading various parts of the Plague and probably see very little return on those investments. However, new tires will absolutely be money well spent. Swapping to some old clapped E13 tires resulted in a much more playful ride feel, where not only was perceived rotational weight lower, but rolling resistance was decreased and traction and predictability were improved. Tires are an easy fix though. The room for improvement that has a much less tangible result for added costs can be found in finish details such as the lack of chain and seat stay protection guards. The cost of having the dropper post installed and set up out of the box was another corner cut short, though to be fair, the internally routed cable housing was in place, making the chore much less trouble. The lack of bike setup guide material was also something that we'd like to see improved. The entry-level price point means that this could be a lot of people's first full suspension bike, or at least their first one in a modern era. and the thrifty airborne consumer probably isn't working with a local bike shop to build and prep their new bike properly. In the direct-to-consumer business model, that bike building support system is reduced to the contents of the box, which were fairly absent. Graphic designers, copywriters, photographers, and printing of such guides aren't free, and hitting this price value is tough on margins. But just know that you may want to factor in the expense of some post-ride burritos as favors into the cost of the bike for having some more experienced friends or a shop help get you going if you fit this less experienced demographic. We're often told that only the latest and the greatest will suffice, but during this test session, we never failed to have fun while riding this much cheaper Airborne Plague. The bottom of the hill was always found with an ear-to-ear smile and an eager excitement to do it all over again. It was refreshing to see that after over 20 years of riding mountain bikes, often at the high end of the market, we were never held back from the goal of enjoying a ride. And for people just entering the sport, or maybe a few years in, the fact that you can get a bike that has, say, 90% of the capability of a high-end bike, but for 30% of the cost, is simply amazing. Anyone with a fat credit card can go buy one of dozens of amazing $10,000 bikes these days and still not know what they're doing with it, and only ever get out on the same trails as ever to ride as slow as ever. We'd argue that the extra money would be better spent on a weekend of coaching lessons to make your shredding both faster and safer. Take what's left of the difference and spend that on a riding destination vacation. What are you going to look back on in 20 years? All the cool carbon bits that you used to have? Or the memory of those sweet landscapes around Moab? The trickle-down of technology and progress is making our sport more accessible to more people, and that's what makes a bike like the Plague pretty sick.